What's up, guys? How are you? It's Wei from Revolution Magazine and Tim from WatchBox. Excuse the whole sort of serial killer look, but it's freezing here in Philadelphia.
No escape in the Northeast. All right, but here today, we got quite a bit to talk about. We're here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Right, the famous steps. That if you're a fan of Rocky, like as I am, and I'm sure you are as well, this is the famous steps where he runs up and then sort of does his dance next to the Rocky statue. But what we'd like to talk about a little bit is shock resistance, and this is how it relates to these steps. So the famous scene where Rocky runs up the steps, they had to create a specific piece of film equipment for it called the steadicam. And the steadicam is an instrument that isolates the camera from the movements of the person holding it. So they're able to run beside Rocky shooting that scene in one interrupted shot without having the camera shake around. And in watches, there's something very similar to that as well called shock protection. And shock protection in particular related to the oscillator, the tiny balance wheel that gives you precision in your watch. And that oscillator has a shock protection device called KIF or Inca block, and that allows you to essentially have a watch that functions. Tim's going to explain how that works to you.
Yeah, so the balance in a watch is essentially just like a wheel that regulates the speed and the force of the tick of the watch. The tick in the top of the watch is regulated by the bounce of the balance, and the balance pivots on an axle. This axle is called the staff. Now, historically in the pocket watch era, the surest way to damage and stop your watch was to shock it and damage the fine pivots of the balance staff.
That's right.
So in 1790, Abraham Louis Breguet, famous watchmaker, created a shock protection system for pocket watches, then known as parachute, or effectively a parachute. And you can actually see the system right here on top of the balance of a modern Breguet La Tradition. Very different from modern shock protection, but similar in the concept. It's a spring on top of the balance staff pivot, so that by moving fractions of a millimeter, it can relieve enough stretch on the pivot to stop it from becoming damaged or distorted, thus preserving both the function of the watch as well as the precision of the watch. Now, that's lived on in the modern era, Way. I think you have a great example of where it went.
Yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, the balance wheel is mounted on the staff, and how Inca block or KIF works is it's a jewel that's spring-loaded, essentially, right? So you've got a little bit of play every time it's shocked and can bounce up and down and return to its original position. So I've got a watch made by an independent watchmaking company called Bethune, which is one of our favorites, would you agree? The guy behind it, Lenny Flajolet, I consider to be one of the greatest watchmakers alive. And this is a watch that has a triple parachute system. Actually, what it means, it has 3 spring-loaded jewels on it. So you've got a balance bridge, and on that bridge, the balance is mounted. On either side of it is a jewel that is spring-loaded, and then in the center where the balance is mounted, you will have a third jewel where it's spring-loaded as well. So this really helps to isolate that balance wheel from all the shocks related to the watch, right? Sure. But there are additional ways in which you can create shock resistance in watches as well. One is to mount the entire movement on elastomers, for example, and Tim's got an example of that in his pocket. We just happen to travel with lots of watches in our pockets, and incidentally, all of these are for sale.
So now this is an interesting way of taking a very simple watch and making it not just shock resistant in the traditional functional sense, but making it lifestyle compatible so that you can wear the watch, shock the entirety of it while playing sports, while riding a mountain bike, while riding a motorcycle. This does have shock protection on the balance staff, but the entire movement of this Bremont Martin Baker actually features a elastomer shock protection to isolate the movement from the case, and in doing so, it makes the watch viable for the whole range of activities people want to undertake while wearing their watch in the modern era, because this is now what's known as a sports watch. Breguet wouldn't have known the term because you wore your watch to tell time and that was that. This is a luxury product.
Very cool. And there's also been brands in the last decade or so that have had also innovations related to creating new types of cases. Cases that have shock resistant elements to them as well. And Tim has an example of that in his pocket, now in his hand as well.
That's a fact, and we're going to keep it simple, just the case. This is a Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Extreme World Alarm, and you can see that there are 2 different cases, one within the other. Now, the watch does have balance staff shock protection like we discussed, but the entire chassis that mounts the movement is isolated by springs from the outer carriage. You can see the outer carriage attaches to the strap and forms the underslung portion that touches the wrist. And then there is an inner assembly which is made of titanium. The outer is steel. The inner titanium cage isolates the movement from the shocks of the wrist.
And there's myself and 3 guys from WatchBox here. We're all going to strap one of these on our wrist and now run up and down the stairs for you.